get started. This session is called Asking Better Questions, and it's based on a Farm Radio International's new broadcaster, How to Guide. As broadcasters and producers, we ask many questions every day. It's how we get our guests to share information and tell their stories. So, how can we ask better questions? Today, we will learn about how asking better questions can save our listeners and help us produce better programs. We'll also review how we can get started by planning our interviews, preparing different kinds of questions, preparing questions that are specific and based on research, and asking better follow-up questions. But first, what is a broadcaster How to Guide? And where can you find them? For that, I hand you over to my colleague, Busi Nyabecha, to explain. Busi, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Busi Nyabecha, and I am the e-learning and networking coordinator at Farm Radio International. Right now, we are going to take a look together at two things. One, what is a broadcaster How to Guide, or BH2? Two, where and how do we find broadcaster How to Guide? So, what is a broadcaster How to Guide? Well, Farm Radio produces a variety of training resources that are available to radio broadcasters across Africa. Our most popular resource is the Broadcaster How to Guide. Each guide explains a broadcasting skill in plain language with examples and useful tips. We have more than 50 Broadcaster How to Guides available, 2 of which are available in audio format. These guides provide step-by-step instruction on how to create a radio campaign, on how to serve women farmers well, or how to learn any other skill. You can use Broadcaster How to Guides to learn new skills that help to improve your broadcasting and serve your listeners better. Now, let's find some Broadcaster How to Guides. First, we need to go to Farm Radio's resource website. So on your phone or on your computer, go to your internet browser and type in farmradio.fm. farmradio.fm. This is where you will find all the different websites with Farm Radio resources. As you can see, there are quite a few. We have Buzzawire, which is the Farm Radio's bi-weekly online news service. Then we have the Scripts website. This is where you find a collection of written resources, including breakgrounders, interview scripts, radio spots, drama scripts, and others to use to inform your programming. We also have the training website. This is where you find the Broadcaster How to Guides, as well as learning modules. And lastly, we have the e-discussion website, which is a space for broadcasters to discuss specific topics. All of these resources are available for free to all Farm Radio International broadcasting partners. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Now, we want Broadcaster How to Guide specifically. So we will click on the training icon, which is the third icon to the right if using a PC, and the third icon at the bottom if using a mobile phone. The icon looks like a lady standing next to a whiteboard that says training. This will take you to our training website. So if you are using a PC or laptop, in the top right-hand corner, you will see there are some options for language. If you are using your mobile phone, the language options are on top. We have English, French, Swahili, Amharic, Hausa, and Portuguese. We have some resources available in each of these languages. To see resources in these languages, click on the language of your preference. But we are going to continue in English. If we look down on the page, we see there are different types of resources. There are audio resources, guides, learning modules, and publications. On a PC, you can see this on the bottom right under filter. If you're on a mobile phone, you will see this filter at the bottom of the screen. You can filter through our resources by clicking on the type of resource you're looking for, or you can use the search bar in the top right-hand corner to search for the keywords or skills you are interested in. You can also browse all of our resources on the website by going to the bottom of the screen and clicking the next page button. To see the guides, the BH2s, using the filter, we have to click on Guide. Let us look at the broadcaster how-to guides. There are different categories or types of BH2s. You will see the different categories by clicking the drop-down arrow under Sort Category By. You will see that we have farm radio standards, formats, journalism skills, management, program development, and technical skills. It is interesting to know that most broadcaster how-to guides follow the same format or have the same structure or sections, no matter the category. Let's take a look at the broadcaster how-to guides we are discussing today, asking better questions. To see this guide, we will click on it. If you cannot see it on your screen, you can use the search window and type in asking better questions. At the top, you can see introduction or background. This will give you basic knowledge about the topic. Next, we have how the skill helps us serve listeners better or improve our programs. This section lists the benefits of learning this skill. Then the bulk of the document is how to get started. This is a step-by-step guide on implementing this skill. It provides in-depth information on the skill and how to use the skill yourself. We also have recommendations or do's and don'ts. And lastly, we have other sources of information. This section lists a glossary of other resources you can use to learn more about the topic at hand. Now, to download a broadcaster how-to guide, click on the print button on the right of the screen, just below the BH2 title. The system will ask you to select a printer, but we want to download the resource. So instead of choosing a printer, we will choose another option. Click on the drop-down arrow next to select printer, and you will see these options. If using a PC, you might see the option to choose your printer. Then you will also see save as PDF. If using a mobile phone, you will see two options, save as PDF and all printers. Click on save as PDF. Then click on save at the bottom. If on PC, or if you're on a mobile phone, you will see an orange button which looks like a down arrow with PDF written under. A dialog box on where to save the document will pop up. In most cases, it will automatically show your downloads folder in your PC and internal storage with different folders to choose from on your mobile. Choose the folder of your choice, preferably downloads. Now, the guide is saved to your phone or computer for future access. You can look for it in the downloads folder. And now, let's dive into the content of this particular broadcaster, How to Guide, Asking Better Questions. Patrick, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Busi, for the good explanation. And I hope everyone who has joined us is capable, knows what to do and where to go. So now we know what a BH2 is. Kindly note also that this webinar is about one of the new BH2 topics in the series that you can access from the Farm Radio website. Let us begin by answering the question, what are questions? As you can see on your screen. Questions are the backbone of our work as radio program producers, presenters, and reporters. Mainly, we use interviews to ask questions, to get answers from our interviewees, and use those answers to make programs for our listeners. To produce good programs, we need to ask better questions. And one of the definitions of better questions is that they are questions that do not lead the interviewee. These are leading questions. Leading questions make the interviewee know that you want them to answer your questions in a certain way, your way. So that must be avoided. Let us go to the next slide, please. Better questions do not implicitly indicate what the interviewer wants to hear or confirm through the interviewee's response. The questions are open-ended, allowing the interviewee to speak their minds. Better questions are non-leading questions. The question does not lead, does not give a clue, or does not point to a direction of the expected answer. In addition to that, better questions make your interviewer happy because they speak the truth. They tell you what they know, experience, or feel about your questions. So asking better questions helps you, the broadcaster, to serve your listeners better. How does this happen? Let's go to the next slide, please. So asking better questions serves your listeners better in several ways. Your listeners hear impartial, unbiased, and detailed responses on the topic from your interviewee. Your listeners know more about who your interviewee is, what they know, and how they feel about your question. Better questions bring out an element of surprise in your listeners because in the course of speaking their mind, the interviewee might reveal something that nobody thought or imagined. So asking better questions also gives value to follow-up questions because they prompt more twists in your interviewee answers, and there is an element that interests your listeners. Asking better questions helps you, the broadcaster, to produce better programs. How does this happen? Next slide, please. Curiosity is the pillar of journalism, the program that answers the 4 W's plus the 1 H. Best is a program that gives all the ingredients of a high-quality program. Answers to unqualified or unbiased what, why, where, who, and how produce better programs. When you ask better questions, you win the trust of your interviewee, and the interviewee in turn gives you what is on their mind, trusting that you will not misrepresent or misquote them. This leads to production of better programs. As broadcasters, we should aim to achieve two main things. One, ask better questions through interviews that reflect the true picture of our interviewees, and that it should not be an extension of our thoughts as interviewers or ideas. The second aim should be to produce better programs that serve our listeners better. So, if these two aims are our objectives, how can we achieve them? Next slide, please. We propose a few steps, and these steps, we call them how to get started. So how do we get started? The first of them is to plan your interview. Next slide. Yes. When you are planning your interview, consider the following 3 steps. First, find the right person who has sufficient knowledge and experience on the topic. Second, focus on what you want to learn from that person. And third, do some extensive research on the topic. So when formulating better questions, think about different types of questions that you may ask. Next slide, please. Considering different types of questions, there are 2 main types of questions: biased and objective questions. Biased questions are leading questions, and objective questions are neutral. To serve our listeners better, we need to strive for neutral, objective, and unbiased questions. The approach will help us produce better programs. We need to avoid asking leading questions because they prevent us from serving our listeners better. Just to remind you that this webinar is based on our latest BH2 presentation at Farm Radio International. That presentation has a case of Nima from Tanzania. The story presents different sides of her farming story. We give you examples of how a broadcaster could ask Nima better questions to facilitate her to tell her story. A broadcaster can produce a high-quality program that serves listeners better, achieving the desired objective of a professional broadcaster. Let us review examples of some questions to ask and avoid asking Nima if we are to produce a better program that serves our listeners better. The next slide gives us some examples, as you can see. For instance, if you ask the question, was there not enough rain? This is a leading question, so it is not a good question. A better question would be, Nima, how was your maize yield this year? And a follow-up question would be, what factors affected the yield? Next slide, please. This is neither here nor there question. In other words, you can ask this question irrespective of whether the response was that Nima had an excellent yield or didn't have an excellent yield. As you design your questions, be mindful of different types of questions. Strive to avoid those that do not serve your purpose, and ask those questions that help you to achieve what you want. We will consider 3 types. of questions: predisposing questions, leading questions, and loaded questions. Let us first look at predisposing questions. Predisposing questions are the ones which we have on the screen at the moment. Predisposing questions give the interviewee an impression that you, the interviewer, are looking for a specific response. The manner the interviewer asks the question forces the interviewee to answer what they would consider as a desirable response to the question. So an example would be, Nima, do you use improved maize seed? A better question to ask would be, what kind of seeds do you use, Nima? This question implicitly tells the interviewee that the desired response, that the first question, Nima, do you use improved maize seed, shows to the interviewee that they want them to answer in the affirmative, to say yes. But when you ask the second type of question, what kind of seeds do you use, Nima? Nima is at liberty to tell you the truth about what she knows. Let us go to the next slide. Another question would be, which is a predisposing question. Do you favor adopting the new and effective harvesting techniques to reduce crop loss that some farmers in this area use, for instance? When you ask your question in that manner, your interviewee, in this case, Nima, will know that probably this is what you are looking for. So you must avoid that. Better questions would be, as you can see, do you happen to know if you have experienced crop loss, either pre or post-harvest? You could also ask, what do you think are the reasons for it? And then a follow-up question could be, how do you feel about the different harvesting techniques that some farmers are using or are trying? So in that sense, Nima would be at liberty to answer you because you are not predisposing anything. You are not trying to show that you are looking for certain answers. Next slide, please. Another set of questions are what are called leading prompts. And prompts are used to dig a little deeper into an interviewee's answer or statement. They are very useful, but you must ask them in such a way that you do not put your words into the interviewee's questions. So for example, a prompt question would be, are you saying that the new storage options presented by the extension officer don't work, for example? So in that sense, it means there has been a discussion before, and there was a way whereby the extension officer said a number of things. Now you are asking Nima, do you think what the extension officer said doesn't work? In that sense, it's a leading probe because it shows kind of what you are looking for. Instead, you should ask the question in an open-ended manner. What do you mean by that? Or could you explain? When you ask such questions, it means that Nima will be at liberty to tell you what she means and explain or clarify. The next slide, please. Another way of looking at loaded questions is that they imply that some fact is true. These are loaded questions now. They imply that some fact is true, although it has not been established. And responding to this type of question places your interviewee in a dilemma. They are not free. Take another example for Nima. Do you think the extension officer was lying when he told you that you were losing 20% of your crop? For example, when you put your question like this, you are already saying what you are looking for or your understanding. And Nima, being the humble farmer, would not want to contradict you. Therefore, you are putting her in a difficult position if her answer is different. A better way to ask that question would be, what do you think of the extension officer's statement that you are losing 20% of your maize before it gets to the market? That is an open-ended question, and Nima will feel free to tell you what she thinks. Next slide, please. So we must make sure that we are avoiding leading questions. Non-leading questions are open-ended questions, and they eliminate or remove any bias. These questions, they should not put your interviewee in a dilemma whereby they should be answering, for example, yes or no, in which case there might not be room to explain whatever is in their mind. So these leading questions must be avoided, and you must try to have neutral and unbiased questions which you must ask your interviewee. The interviewee shouldn't be forced to agree or disagree. Next slide, please. So what we have on this slide are some examples of how you could ask your questions. For instance, could you describe what your farm looks like? How was your maize yield this year? What factors affected the yield? Describe to me how you and Godfrey plant and harvest the maize. By the way, Godfrey is the husband of Nima. How do you and Godfrey make your farming decisions? Is it important to you to work as a team? How do you feel about the different harvesting techniques that some farmers are trying? Why have you chosen to store your maize in bags? Those questions are neutral because she must describe, she must talk about what she feels, she must think about different factors, etc. And these help that she should not kind of borrow anything from what you have said, but simply think and give you the answers. The next slide, please. So you must make sure that when you are preparing for your interviews, you prepare different kinds of questions. As a journalist, one mainly focuses on getting the what, and this is important. What is the information gatherer? It gives you the information that you and your listeners are interested in. So you must prepare better questions to get the information. In addition to questions, sometimes it is important also to prepare better questions that tell your listener more about your interviewee. It gives you the information of who the interviewee is, because sometimes it is very important that when they know who the interviewee is, it helps them a lot. The interview might be just someone like them. So it is important for them to know who that interviewee is. So in addition to the information, also find out about the who. Next slide, please. So when you are asking questions about the who, you must make sure that you are not making them to fill or to tell you leading answers. For example, in your questions, you're asking questions like, were you very angry? Were you very happy? How does this look like to you as said by so and so? So you must kind of avoid those kind of questions. Some of the questions you might want to ask are what we have on the screen. How did you feel at the beginning of the planting season? That's a neutral question. What was it like for you and Godfrey when you realized how much maize was lost to fall armyworm? Can you describe the first day your son was able to help you with the harvest? What are your dreams for the future? So these are some of the questions that you can ask to find out more about NEMA, because your listeners might also be interested in the person, in addition to the main content of your discussion. Next slide, please. So many listeners, as we have said, will identify with these questions, and they would want to know what NEMA is going to answer, because NEMA is one of them, and whatever her answers, if they are positive, they might affect their lives as well. So that's why it's very important to ask these non-leading questions to NEMA as well, because through that, the listeners are going to benefit a lot. Next slide, please. When you are preparing your questions, make sure that you prepare specific questions. Avoid overgeneralization. Refrain from asking questions like, what is the best way to deal with pest problems in maize? Well, this might sound like a question which is specific enough, but it is not. There are many kinds of pests that damage maize plants and stored maize. So it is very important to be specific, because a question like this will simply attract a response like, well, it depends. So probably you should ask a specific question like, what is the best way to deal with fall armyworm in maize 6 weeks after planting? If NEMA is going to answer that question, or any farmer is going to answer that question, it's going to be a specific and direct answer to what you are looking for. Or you could also ask a question, what do you do to prevent beetles in your harvested maize? When you ask these questions, you'll see that they are specific as they can be. So when you pose such questions to your interviewees, they will understand what exactly you are asking. They'll also have an easier job to answer your questions. When asking better questions, there are some words that you must not include in your questions. Let's know about these in the next slide, please. So words like recommended or proper must not be said or used in a question. When you use these words and others like them, you give your interviewee an impression that they should respond in the affirmative. And as discussed earlier, these words form a predisposed question. To expand on this, let us go to the next slide. So when you ask predisposed questions, questions with leads like recommended, proper, and others like them, if you ask them to NEMA, you may confuse her. She may believe that she has been using recommended methods herself, but probably not necessarily the recommended processes. So in that sense, NEMA may want to make you happy sometimes and may answer in a way that probably is not what she's thinking or what is the truth. So to avoid confusing your interviewee, try to ask open-ended questions. But how can you ask open-ended questions? How can you be specific? You must ensure that you prepare your questions in a specific manner. And after that, you make sure that you make some research about it. Open-ended questions reduce the risk of making assumptions. Next slide, please. So we talked about research. We want you to make sure that you have done research about what you are trying to find out. Because when you do research, you are aware of different ways to deal with a particular problem. For example, a pest problem, or a problem with soil fertility, or harvesting, and then using specific examples will help you to get specific answers. So for example, what do you think of the idea that farmers in your area get together to purchase a single mechanical harvester that everyone could take turns using? Well, this question shows that you read around it, you read about it, and therefore it's one of an area where you want to find the ideas of Nima about the method which others are thinking about in her area. Next slide, please. Make sure that you are ready to ask good follow-up questions. That means that you have to listen very carefully to what the interviewee is saying. If you have the next major question written, and then after asking one question, you are waiting for your interviewee to answer and finish, and you to jump to the next question, that may be a mistake. What you need is to listen attentively. Listen and find out if what the interviewee is saying makes sense, whether what she's saying has gone far enough, whether it has the details. Well, if not, you would need to ask follow-up questions. Next slide, please. So some of the follow-up questions you may ask would be like, can you compare it to last year? If she just talked about, that is, if she just talked about her harvest this year. So you could say, can you compare it to last year? And then if she has said that last year was better, you would follow by saying, what was, why was last year better? You know, that shows that you were listening. Because if she didn't say that last year was better, and then you ask the question, why was last year better? Then it is exposing you that you were not listening. So be listening and ask appropriate questions to make sure that your listener and your listeners are able to follow the questions that you are asking. Next slide, please. So at this moment, we would like to have, we know that as we're discussing, a number of people have been putting questions in the chat. So we'd like to see some of the questions that may need to be answered. Okay, I'll ask Vijay to be on standby to answer this question, which is coming from Isidori Matandula. And the question reads, there are some questions you may not know if they are in the probe system. How will I know if my questions in the probe system. So I think Isidori wants to know, how do I know if I am asking a leading question or a leading probe? Vijay, over to you. How do you help Isidori Matandula? How does he know that his questions are not leading probes?
Okay, I'm not sure that I completely understand your question, so I'm going to ask you for some clarification first. So you say there are some questions that you may not know if they're in the probe system. How will I know if my is the essence of the question, how do I know if I'm asking a leading probe? Is this what you want to ask?
I think it sounds like that, sometimes you can have a series of questions and then you are not sure whether such a question might be a leading probe. So maybe in short, we could say, are there any pointers in a question that tells you that if I include this word and that word and that word, probably I am leading my interviewee? Maybe I could rephrase the question like that, Vijay.
Yeah, well, I think that is the key, that you don't want to include any words that could any words that could be a clue for the person you're asking the question, the interviewee, to answer in a particular way. I mean, that's a broad understanding of how to ask non-leading probes. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Let's move on to the next question.
Right. Another way, just to add, make sure that you do not ask questions which attract yes or no answer, because yes or no doesn't give room for your interviewee to explain anything. So that's a very common one. Our next question is coming from Biamukama Aloysius, and he asks, or they ask, how, if I know the answer, but the interviewee does not know it, and I want his or her response, how do I avoid leading question on this matter? Well, Aloysius, you remember an example we gave just in this session, whereby because you have done research, you have many answers, but you also have a number of gaps. And that's why you are doing the interview, to know what the interviewee knows about it. So the question which was asked to Nima was, what are your thoughts that some farmers in this area are doing 1, 2, 3? So number one, it's showing that you know that this is what farmers are doing. And then number two, you want to find out what Nima's views are about the subject you have presented. So if she doesn't know, then you tell from her answer, she will say, maybe I'm not aware, or I don't know about it, or I'll find out, something like that. So it's okay to know something, but don't force it on your interviewee to answer in the affirmative or not. Ask it in such a way that it is open-ended. Next question, please. It's coming from Alfred James Mungwa, who is the station manager for, station manager for Nyimba FM in Zambia. And the question is, sorry, I kind of have lost that question, but then I'll ask, I'll go to the next one, which is coming from Longot Matthew Abekson. The question is, how do I handle an interviewee who doesn't want to disclose more about the question that I have asked? Okay, I think this would also be a common question for many people. One of the answers is that we have said that you are looking for the what, which is the information itself. But it is also important to look for the who, understand the person. There are times when interviewees might not want to disclose some questions, some answers, because maybe you just appeared a few minutes ago and you're asking questions. It is important to establish a good rapport with them, have an understanding with them. Remember, we are looking at questions which help, like maybe in farming, in agriculture, in health matters, etc., etc. So it's not like issues of politics or something where other people might want to hide information. So in this kind of arena, establish the rapport, let the interviewee get used to you, and then they would be able to explain more about what you have asked. But if they still look at you as a stranger, they might not answer your questions truthfully. Next question is from Alex Wendera. And for this one, I'll ask Vijay again to come in. Alex is asking, is it professional for the interviewee to have a clue of the questions that have been prepared ahead of the interview? Many insist they need to be briefed or sent them questions in advance. Very true. Vijay, can you pick that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we like to avoid, but certainly it's a bit of a dilemma because there are certain, maybe it's somebody from the Ministry of Agriculture, something like that, and they may actually require that sort of notice. So, you know, I mean, we don't want to do that. You should always feel free to ask probing questions, depending on how your interviewee answers the question. That may get you the information you need, which you wouldn't get if the interviewee completely stays on track and on message, which they're more likely to do if they see the questions beforehand. For all of the questions that are being asked today, I would suggest that you'll get some insight, some more insight by reading closely through the BH2 on asking better questions.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Yes, read more lessons on how you can ask better questions by coming back to the website and read the how to ask better questions. Another question is from Alfred James Mungwa from Zambia. The question is, how can I hold an interview when my guest goes off topic? Well, simple. You simply repeat the question and say, my question is, again, you emphasize on what that question is. I'm assuming here your interviewee goes off topic, not deliberately, but probably because they did not understand the question. So there's no problem repeating the question. Another question is coming from Frank Malua, and he asks, what are you supposed to do when the source is not able to answer your questions properly? I mean, explaining more information. Again, Frank, for this question, you go for probing questions. You listen to what they say. If they don't explain everything as you are expecting, then ask further questions. You can ask one question and have many probes, as many as you may ask until when they are able to answer your question. Another question is, okay, he says he wants a short answer. And this is Aloysius again. I want short answer, but the interviewee decides to give too much details. How do I cut them short in order to keep it simple and good, but also not to seem, underrating the interviewee? Well, yeah, it happens a lot. Sometimes you don't have much time and you feel like the interviewee is going on and on and on. What you would do is to simply say, I think you have given me what I'm looking for. This was my question, and this is your answer. I think I get it. But it is important to be respectful. Do not feel like you are cutting them off and they are talking bad things so that they feel bad because you are stopping them from continuing to answer your question. Just be tactful, show that they have answered the question and that you appreciate it so much. I think I can take the last question now. And the last question, VJ, get ready. The question is, okay, it's coming from someone, okay, because it's someone, there are no details about them. Some interviews heat up. Suppose me as an interviewer asks a better question, but a duty bearer running from being exposed in tackling the question tries to hide some details. Won't it be necessary to engage the predisposing questions? Well, that question, VJ, you might take it up, help us with an answer, please.
Yeah, my first response would be that we have a broadcaster how-to guide that we wrote a few years ago that talks about how to ask questions of people in who are duty bearers, who are people in positions of authority, who may have some interest in not answering your question. So that's my first response. Read through that BH2. The other question is, it's just about setting up the expectations of the interview in the beginning, saying I'm going to ask about a dozen questions, for example. We have 60 minutes for the question, and you know, if you think it might be a good possibility, you are not going to get transparent information from your interviewee, then you make it clear what you want to know ahead of time.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Well, we know that most of you still have a number of questions, and please go to the BH2 and find out what tricks you can get from there to help you become better producers who produce better questions, who ask better questions, and then produce nice programs. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. We apologize for those whose questions we have not answered at the moment. It's because we have kind of run out of time. So this brings us to the end of our event today. I want to thank you all again for your attendance and participation, active participation, I would add. We hope this webinar was a valuable learning experience for you. Please go to farmradio.fm to explore all of our resources and to read our new broadcaster how-to guide, Asking Better Questions. If you have any feedback about this webinar, please share it with us by sending an email to radio@farmradio.org or by contacting your local networking officer, Farm Radio local networking officer. We also encourage you to share what you learned in your country or regional Farm Radio WhatsApp groups, or to join your local WhatsApp if you haven't already. Also, stay tuned for more exciting opportunities with Farm Radio. Applications for the Farm Radio Awards open next week, Monday, October the 3rd. So don't miss that. Again, thank you so much for joining. For Farm Radio International, I am Patrick Paga. Until next time, have a pleasant evening and goodbye.